This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Greater Toronto Sewer and Watermain Contractors Association. Clean water, our goal, our future.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me today I have...
Hi there, my name is Nadia Todorova, and I'm the Executive Director of the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario, or RCCAO for short.
I am Patrick McManus, and I am the Executive Director of the Greater Toronto Sewer and Watermain Contractors Association and the Ontario Sewer and Watermain Construction Association.
And the reason both of you are here is because you raised an issue with us about utility location and how it's sort of bottlenecking everything else that needs to be done in construction. So after my very simple and probably way off summary, maybe you guys could explain further what exactly that means.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Warren, for having us here today. This is an issue that is really paramount to the construction and infrastructure space. So, just to kind of lay the ground for this issue, basically, anytime you need to dig in Ontario, the province has a mandatory one-call system, which allows, homeowners, contractor, developers, builders, and other excavators to make one locate request to a call center instead of a separate calls to utility in order to get kind of a map out of all the underground utility that are present before they start digging. So, we avoid hitting any sort of utility locates, disturbing the internet or whatever the case might be, whatever's buried under there. So we have a clear idea of what it is that is under there. So when we start to build that vital infrastructure across Ontario, we are not, causing any disruption to services. Through the one call system, the province has a deadline of 5 business days for locate responses. So they have 5 business days after a contractor or an entity submits a request for those locates. They have 5 business days to get back to you with that marking. But what we have been finding is that utilities often do not respond until weeks after that initial request has gone in. And, we have some estimates that 85% of locate requests are late. And it's really important to kind of emphasize how vital it is to get those locates, because without getting those locates, most of the work on site cannot proceed. And our members are really reporting significant and consistent another important fact is that costly delays because of this. So an example of that kind of serious consequences of the delayed locates is that standby time runs at about $1,000 an hour in the sewer and water main sector, and I'm sure Patrick can provide more detail on that. And so contractors are looking at losing about $10,000 a day when they must wait for those utility locates, which only adds to the cost of a new home or new infrastructure that's being put in. In the road sector, that price tag is about $20,000 a day. So, this is an issue that unfortunately we have been kind of tracking for the last 7 years or so. We did a report back in 2015 that looked at those delays that were taking place, and the delays unfortunately have not improved over the last several years.
Unbelievably, it's actually been 9 years now since what was called the Ontario Underground Infrastructure Notification System Act was passed. That's what we refer to as the One Call Act here in the province, and it is late utility locates are. They're the primary cause for the late delivery of core infrastructure projects in all of the major urban centers in the province. What was once, generally focused in Toronto and Ottawa and Hamilton is now spread to every corner of the province. And this act was passed with a lot of industry support back in 2012 because it promised to reduce red tape and speed up the delivery of utility locates by centralizing the processing of locate requests into one organization. And 9 years later, we're actually in a situation where they're taking much, much longer to deliver now. And construction project timelines are being significantly delayed than the system that was in place previous. Now there is certainly cause for that. There's been a sharp increase in the number of locate requests being put in, but year after year after year, there is no improvement. In fact, it's only been going one way. It's only been getting slower, and the wait times have been getting longer, and that's creating excessive cost on public infrastructure projects anywhere that excavation work takes place.
Okay, and so is the bottleneck with? It sounds like it isn't with one call itself. It's when the information gets into them and then goes out to other people. That's where the problem lies. Or maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, I think you've got that right. It's the one call center is certainly following its requirement of receiving the locate and putting the request out. It's in the actual delivery of that request by the utility companies where we're seeing the excessive delays.
And just out of curiosity, before we get to that, you said there's been a sharp rise in locate requests. Why is that?
I think there's a much broader awareness now than there was even 10 years ago about the need to call before you dig, and that Ontario One Call has done a great job about advertising the need and the safety aspect that it provides, and that's that's really led to even homeowners, a lot of homeowners calling in before they dig in gardens and swimming pools and fence posts. But that has, that's one of the reasons why we're seeing such a delay on the construction projects, which we think is really important to begin differentiating between construction projects and these single address call-ins, because we think projects are much more time sensitive and under sort of a much greater strain for construction season than an individual homeowner doing small little projects on their property.
RCCAO has 6 solutions to this problem. So maybe you guys could kind of list those off and how they would speed things up.
So we think there are a number of critical elements that need to be reformed in this process, not just specifically related to the delivery of locates out in the field. We think that the first and foremost one is a restructuring of the Ontario One Call board and its voting structure. So the way that the board is set up and the way that the voting structure works is not in the public interest. It's not a public interest voting process. So there are 6 sectors allocated on the One Call board: municipalities and government, electricity, gas, oil and pipeline, telecoms and cable, other, and excavators, who are non-members, non-voting members. And the structure of the board actually requires utility companies who occupy effectively 2/3 of the seats to vote against their own individual interests in order to put in place a more rigid enforcement protocol to meet that 5-day timeline. So the structure is flawed. And it's really difficult, to vote in favor of putting in more rigid timelines, more rigid enforcement against yourself, and everything is going to start and stop with the board and its voting structure. So we think primarily, first and foremost, that's the number one item that needs to get reformed at One Call. Nadia, do you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, actually, it's something just to emphasize and to reiterate in terms of what Patrick said, that the structure of the board is flawed. One Call has never actually levied a single penalty to date, which, is quite staggering in terms of, as Patrick mentioned, this entity has been around for, almost a decade. And it really highlights the fact that there needs to be more of an equitable distribution in terms of the members, and it adequately representing the different industries that are impacted by this legislation. So getting that board and getting it to be more of an equal representation is really important, and it's a huge part of the solutions that we have on tap.
Okay, and also you've elucidated in your some of your solutions, there needs to be more equality amongst contractors for the actual jobs themselves. It's
a difficult situation right now, primarily for legal and liability purposes. I mean, there is certainly a lot of sets of eyes on excavation projects, especially where utility lines, in particular gas lines, get struck by an excavator. And So there is a hesitancy amongst contractors and project owners to share locates amongst the different subcontractors involved in a project. And effectively, it's because there's no sort of clear indication in the act about how that should be done. So what we're finding happening in some instances is contractors are calling in locates, and because they are not going to share with those locates with their subcontractors, a subcontractor will call in locates for exactly the same project so that they get their own paperwork and their own locate. So we're having a lot of duplication of process. And that's contributing to some of the backlog that we're seeing, with the locate. So I think if there's a system, put in place where the project owners are the ones actually calling in for the locates and then sharing them with all of the subcontractors on their job sites, that will actually, at least make it easier and avoid some of this duplication of work that's going on out there in the marketplace, and some of this backlog that's being created as a result of the duplication will get alleviated.
I agree with in terms of the duplication of process, and that is something that, again, we have been working to kind of address and alleviate on the back end, because as much as we can streamline the requests that are coming in, the better that would be for just the overall volume of locates that are in the system waiting to be processed.
Next, I'd ask another point you've made in the series of solutions is extending the validity period of locates to at least 60 days. Now, to my man on the street perspective, if there's a problem with how quick this is happening, how does extending it help? But I bet you're going to tell me how that happens.
Absolutely. So, obviously, a lot of these projects do last more than 60 days. So the longer locate ticket validity periods, we believe, will reduce the number of locate requests that are coming in, and also, likely impact the numbers and the severity of the late locates that are coming in. One of the things that we have been asking for is that all utilities, not just the gas distributors, should be encouraged to maximize the validity period of their locates, obviously without impairing any of the health and safety of workers and the public. But it just makes more sense to have these locates be valid for a longer period of time. And again, that really impacts the volume of utility locates that are in the pipeline that have to be serviced when you make the locates with a longer validity period.
Just to add into that, locates are only delivered as fast as the slowest locator gets to the job site. So oftentimes it's not one locator providing utility locates on a construction project. You may have 3 or 4 or 5 different locators locating different utilities on a site. So you're only as fast as the last person to show up, and different utilities have different validity periods. So you may have telecoms that are good for the life of a project. So once the paint marks are down one time, they're good, but gas is only valid for 30 days. So if you get gas first and you wait another 10 or 15 days for your cable or hydro locates, by the time you're actually starting to dig, you're likely only going to have a gas located good for 30 days, and then you have to call in what's called a relocate, and a locator has to come back out to your job site to mark the gas line once again. Even if the paint's still on the ground, they have to give the all clear that that all of the what's there is still valid, and that's creating this backlog. And unless we extend, if we can get to a point where we're extending the validity time periods, just so that it's not every 30 days we're calling in relocates, or every 45 days, or every 60 days, it's every 90 days or 120 days. That's going to, again, alleviate some of that relocate backlog that's being created as a result of the short validity periods.
Okay. You also suggest restructuring how locates are delivered and modifying the reporting and record keeping for locate responses. How does one go about doing that?
So, one of the problems that we have right now is that the current data sets on late locates that one call keeps, they don't identify, date received and date delivered. So that has led to kind of a lot of ambiguity in terms of, how long does it actually take for a utility locate to be delivered, and that kind of, lends itself to the overall backlog that we're seeing, but we're not actually quantifying the percentages of that. So, having better data in terms of, this is when a locate was put through, this is when it was serviced, this is how long it took, I think would go a long way in terms of kind of keeping everyone accountable and keeping everyone up to that 5 business day locate response time that they are legislated to provide. And I know this is something that One Call is trying to operationalize and to start to collect more data. That's something that, we've heard, Patrick and I, that they are working to deliver, but I think it won't be something that is implemented overnight. So we potentially could be seeing the delays for locates continue for the foreseeable future.
And Patrick, did you have anything to add to that?
Just quickly, I would add, I mean, I think it's really important as part of their data collection exercise is to differentiate between single address locates and construction project locates, because the biggest impact, the most costly impact they're happening on your infrastructure projects, and single address locates are quicker, they're easier to do. Locators are often paid by the ticket that they complete, and you may have a construction project that runs 3 or 4 blocks versus a single address, which will be a lot quicker and easier to complete. So we think that it's really important to differentiate between those 2 types of locates so that we get a proper understanding for where the delays are actually occurring, because we believe that they're occurring in construction projects in a much, much larger manner than they are at the single address locates. And it'll actually help us quantify, the delays that we're actually experiencing on the job site, rather than all of these, all this locate information getting mixed together. It's hard to sort of quantify what construction projects are actually seeing significant delays.
The more data that you have, the more it's kind of collated. I think the better it is to create positive policy solutions to address this issue.
Your final point of how you'd correct things is eliminating the need for relocates on nonlinear excavation construction sites below a certain depth. So please tell me, first of all, what is a nonlinear excavation construction site, or what would be some examples of that, and why you cannot do relocates with those particularly?
Yeah, so that's just a fancy way for basically saying, for a lot of the high rises, for example, a high rise downtown condo, you have to excavate quite a bit into the ground, to get, those parking utilities and similar infrastructure in place. So when you're doing that kind of like long-term excavation projects, when you're digging the foundation, you're required to call and to receive relocates every 30 to 60 days in order to continue your excavation. However, when you get below a certain depth, those relocates they're not necessary, because there's just nothing down there when you get below a certain depth. So we believe that there shouldn't be that kind of further requirements for those locates. And to the earlier point that we discussed, if you remove some of these requirements to get locates for those kinds of conditions, it really will impact positively the demand that we see in the pipeline for those utility locates. It'll streamline the process, and it'll really do a lot to address the backlog of locate requests that are in the system. And again, similar to what was discussed earlier, it really is a bit of a duplication of the process when you have these conditions for those really deep excavations.
Okay, and I guess finally, you've got all these possible solutions here, but how do you go about executing? Seems like an ominous word, but how do you go about making this happen, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
I mean, and this is, we do have to give a little bit of credit here to the current government, because they have recognized that late locates are an impediment to infrastructure delivery, and they have legislated through a few bills, Building Transit Faster Act and the Building Broadband Faster Act. They have legislated some fast tracking of utility locates. They are fairly limited in scope. For the Building Transit Faster Act, they have just kind of streamlined locates for those 4 major transit projects. But that is positive in terms of them recognizing that this is a problem. It has to be addressed. But as Patrick mentioned, it really has to be systemic changes that take place, and you can do them one at a time, or you can do them all at once, which is, I guess, a little bit unrealistic. But I think just making sure that people understand the scope of the issue and how important it is and how much it impacts the work that we do is crucial, especially as we look towards Ontario's economic recovery post-pandemic. The infrastructure and the construction sector are going to be huge to that. So making sure that we're able to get work out as fast as possible, that there's no unnecessary delays, I think that's going to be a huge impediment to get things off the ground and to see those positive changes taking place.
I think what's really important, and we did sort of touch on it, but just wrapping these things together, is that collecting and appropriately reporting on the data of late locates is going to be critically important to help us understand the scope, where the problems are geographically with specific utility owners, understanding that problem in very sort of specific detail is the important first step. Moving towards reforming the board and the voting structure so that we actually see positive reform in the public interest as opposed to in a self-interested board. And then 3, moving towards greater enforcement of the actual timelines to bring us in line with some of the other provinces and states in the United States that managed to deliver utility locates in a much more efficient manner. I think those are sort of the 3 important steps forward in order to get this problem fixed.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for joining us, Nadia and Patrick.
Thank you.
This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Ontario Sewer and Watermain Construction Association. Clean water is everybody's business.